Hello everyone and welcome back to the JewelleryMaker Academy. My name is Mark Smith and in today's tutorials I'm going to be guiding you through the wonderful world of seed bead ropes, my all-time favourite seed beading techniques. And in today's tutorials we're going to be covering the 4 types, including your simple spiral, your chenille, your spiral peyote, and we're going to be finishing with one of my favourite techniques, the Russian spiral. So as I mentioned, we're going to be covering 4 different techniques, all completely different. But for all of these designs, you're going to need what I have in front of me here are all the components that you're going to need. So first of all, we'll start with the most important, needle and thread. So I'm going to be using predominantly through the tutorials a size 12. If you're new to seed beading, I definitely recommend starting with a size 10, which has got a slightly bigger eye and it eases your threading technique. You can use a tulip needle if you so want to, so any of those perfectly doable. Beading thread. Now I tend to use either a Wildfire or a Fireline, and most of the techniques I'm going to be using 6 pound in breaking strength. And as you can see in front of me, it comes in a myriad of different colours and gauges, but throughout today's tutorials I'm going to be using the black. So that's your needle and thread. Obviously you're going to need a very sharp pair of scissors. These are the Fiskars beading scissors. Seed beads, next important. Now we're going to be using in all of the designs 3 different sizes. We're going to be starting with our 15-0s, which are our smaller seed bead. Then we're going to be working up to our 11-0, and then also we're going to be using our 8-0. Now the number denotes the number of seed beads whole uppermost in an inch. So an 8-0, 8 in an inch, 11, 11 in an inch, etc, etc. So those are the 3 sizes we're going to be using in the tutorials. A couple of the designs we're going to be embellishing, and we're going to be embellishing with 4 or 3 millimeter bicone or round glass beads. And if you want that extra bit of style and sophistication, you can also incorporate gemstones. This is a clear quartz, and again, it'll be a 3 and a 4 millimeter size, no larger than that. And also you might find useful is what I've got my bits and pieces on here, and that is a felt beading mat, and that'll just keep everything in place. We don't want any seed beads rolling off and having to run around looking for them off of the floor. So that's everything you're going to need for all 4 tutorials. And without further ado, we're going to move on to tutorial number 1, which is all about chenille rope. Welcome back. Here we go, the world of chenille. It's probably one of the most simple rope designs to construct. Minimum of moves, a minimum of seed beads to use, and as you can see, it produces some of the most beautiful, beautiful pieces. Right from your multicoloured rainbow necklaces, even starting to do a bit of ombreing. We can use bracelets, earrings, any little sections, and we can even make beautiful Mala rope style necklaces here, where we use the chenille as little stations rather than a complete rope, as you can see on here, and it just adds that little defined elegance to your designs. As I said, it's a beautiful technique, very simple to use, and a very apt technique to begin today's tutorials. So what you will need for your chenille is a minimum of 2 colours. Now for the tutorial, I'm going to be using 8-0s, which is a really nice size to start. If you want to go more delicate, you can move down to 11-0. If you want to go larger, more substantial, then you move up to 6-0s if you'd like. But 8-0s is a really nice starting point. I'm using a size 12 needle with some black Fireline thread, and you may find it useful because we're going to be making a rope with a hole going down through the centre, some sort of dowel, whether it's a wooden stick or a pen, but I find the best thing to use is a piece of this material. Now this is paracord 451, and there are a couple of designs in these tutorials that I will be using this, and you can either at the end of your design slide this off, or you can keep it as part of the integral part of the design, which I've done in the peyote section, which we'll talk about a bit later on. So let's make a start. So of your 2 colours, you need to decide first of all which is going to be your dominant colour. Now your dominant colour will have twice as many beads as your non-dominant colour. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for the purple as the dominant and then use the yellow gold as the addition bead. So we're going to take some of our beads out, and as I said, I'm going to be using an 8/0, which is a nice middle of the range size, which produces some absolutely beautiful ropes. So you can use as many beads as you like as a circumference to your rope, but I find 8 is a really good standpoint. And when we come to do the peyote section later on, again, I will be using 8 beads. So the first thing we're going to do, now we don't need to stop a bead for this because we're going to making our bead into a rope loop. So first of all, I'm going to pick up 8 of my purple. So that's 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're just going to slide that down, and we're just going to make a loop featuring a single knot, like so. And before we close that knot, I'm just going to take my paracord and I'm going to slide it like so. And we're going to pull that nice and tight. And as I said, at the end, you'll be either sliding the paracord out or you'll be using it as part of your design. I'm just going to pull that nice and tight. Okay, so we've now got our 8 beads. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add our next colour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew away from the knot, which I like to do, and I'm going to sew through 2 of our purple beads. And then I'm going to add 1 of our gold, and I'm going to sew through 2 of the purple from the first row. So you can see now it actually makes a nice corner. Then we're going to pick up our next, and we're going to slide through 2 of the purple. Pull that through nice and tight. So you can see that pops into position nice and neatly. Then we're going to turn our work. We're going to pick up our gold. We're going to pop it in, slide through 2. And then we're going to move my little tail out of the way. And then we're going to add our 4th gold bead. We're going to slide through 2, and we're going to do what's called a step up. So I'm going to sew through the 2 purple and into the gold that we added as our first bead. So I'm going to pull that nice and tight. And you can now see we've got our square of purple beads with our 4 corners. So for the next round, we're going to fill in the gaps between the gold beads with the 2 purple beads from our first row. So we're going to pick up 2, jump the gap into the next gold. Then we're going to turn gold to gold, jumping the gap with 2 purple. Pull that through. And then we're going to pick up 2 purple into the gold. And then 2 purple into the gold. And we're going to jump the gap like so. And what we need to do then is just try, if we can, just pull nice and tight, and it'll start to form a little cup around the paracord on the inside. So from now on, we're only going to be introducing a colour at a time. So we've just added the purple, so we now know that we're going to add the gold. Purple, gold, etc. So we've just added all of our purple, and what we're going to do is we're going to do a step up. And the step up this time, we're going to sew through the first of the purple beads. So we're coming up in between the 2 purple. Just unhook my thread. There we go, so pull that nice and tight. So we're going to fill the gap now in between the 2 purple beads, and we're going to jump over the gap into the next set of purple. So we're going to pick up a gold into the gap, jump the big gap into the next of the first group of 2 purple. Pull that nice and tight, and you can already see it's now starting to pull up nice and tight. We're going to pick up a gold, fill the gap, jump the gap into the next purple. Pull nice and tight. Fill the gap, jump the gap into the next little purple. I come up with these little sayings that I repeat over and over in my head, and it just helps me with the repetition. So I'm picking up my last gold, jump the gap, over the gap into the next purple. So fill the gap, jump the gap into the next purple, like so. So when we pull that nice and tight, nice and tight. There we go. So you can now see we've got that little cup pattern starting to form nice and neatly. So what we're going to do next is we're going to do another step up. This time we're going to be stepping up into the gold. So we're going to jump up to the gold, pulling that nice and tight again. And now we've just added the gold, so we know we're going to add the purple, and we know that we're going to be jumping gaps from now on. And the two we're going to fill between the gold is right back to the beginning where we added the two lots of purple. So purple, purple, jump the gap into the next gold. Turn our work. Jump the gap, filling in the gap with two purple. Pull that through. And then we're going to pick up two purple, jump the gap into the yellow, and then we're going to pick up two purple, we're going to jump the gap, and then we're going to step up to come up in between the two purple of the first section. Again, pull that nice and tight, and now we know that we've just added the purple, so we're now going to be adding the yellow. And we know from the previous round that the yellow sits in between the groups of two purple, and then we're going to jump the gap in between. So let's do that now. So we're going to pick up a yellow into the two purple, jump the gap. You can see the needle going through into the first of the next set of two. Pull nice and tight. Then we're going to pick up our yellow. We're going to fill the gap, jump the gap into the first of the next set of two. So jumping the gap into the next set, pulling nice and tight, turning our work. And you can see how important it is to have a dowel when you're doing this. It's making it much easier to hold on to the work. The paracord is doing all the work for us. So we're going to jump the gap, and then we're going to step up into the yellow. So we're jumping the gap into the top yellow. We've just added the yellow, so we now know we're adding the purple. And as you can see, we've got the gap, we're jumping the gap, and we need to fill the space with two purple. So two purple, jump the gap, two purple, jump the gap, two purple, jump the gap, pulling nice and tight, two purple, jump the gap, and then I'll step up in this round. We're going to come up through the first purple, coming up in between its partner. I'm going to pull nice and tight, and then we're going to do our yellow round. We've just done our purple, so we're just going to follow all of the combinations that we've made previously. So as you can see, it's a very quick technique to learn, very repetitive. As long as you remember the golden rules of the step-ups, and also you never add the two colours at the same round. It's always one followed by the next. So we're going to sew through into the purple, and then we're going to step up. And once you've done a few rounds, the stepping up is an automatic reflex. The needle seems to do it itself. So I'll pull that nice and tight, and you can see now we've got the crossing pattern with the yellow popping up. So as I said, if you wanted it to be predominantly yellow, you would start off with 8 yellow and use your purple as your 4 accent beads on the next rounds. Or you could, if you want to, have black, for example, as your base colour, and then every row change colour. You could do that, have a rainbow design. You can go ombre route. It's such a beautiful technique. And as I said, I'm using 8 O's for this. So it's quite a large, dense piece of work. If you wanted to go dainty for a pair of earrings, for example, or a bracelet, you just do exactly the same technique, but you reduce your bead size down to 11 O's and get something a bit more delicate and a bit more intricate. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring one of the bracelets across now, and you can actually see the difference. So this is using 11 O's, so you can see completely different structure. So just from dropping that little bead size. So that's using your 11 O's. Now, because we're making ropes, you will need at some point to add thread to your designs. And in the final chapter of today's tutorials, I'm going to be showing you just how to do that. So don't worry that you're not going to take enough thread off the reel to start and finish your project. I'm going to be showing you how to add more thread. So that's your number one tutorial. That's your chenille. And in the next tutorial, we shouldn't have favorites, I know, but it has to be my all-time favorite rope design, and it's aptly named the Simple Spiral. Welcome back. Now, as I mentioned in the last chapter, we shouldn't have favourites, but I always do. And I have to say, of all of the tutorials that we're going to cover today, I think this one is definitely one of my favourites. It's one of these techniques that looks incredibly complicated, but as the name suggests, it's very, very, very simple. And I can probably say I can teach you how to make this in about 5 minutes. And you will be incredibly, incredibly addicted. And as you can see, some of the colour combinations and patterns and sizes of spiral completely takes over your life. It's just absolutely incredible, right from beautiful, elegant necklaces, got bracelets, and you can even turn the technique, if you want, into earrings as well. So again, it completely is up to you and your design. And it's really good, a really nice way of putting together a scope of whether to make a complete set. So you can have your earrings, your necklace and bracelet all of the same design, or you can take the size down smaller for your earrings to make it more dainty. It's just absolutely, absolutely beautiful. So what I've got in front of me are the components that I'm going to use for this little sample section. And I have got, from the right, I'm starting with some 15 O's in black. Then I'm going for a turquoise 11 O. I'm going for a ivory Ceylon 8O, and then I'm going to, for the middle of the spiral, I'm going to be very spoiled, and I'm going to be using some beautiful glass crystal 4mm bicones. So it's really nice. What I really enjoy about coming up with the designs is to choose the colour combinations and having a play with colour. That's half of the fun for me. And then putting it all together and getting a beautiful piece of jewellery at the end, it just makes it all worthwhile. So again, I'm using a size 12 needle, and I would definitely recommend for this technique using a size 12, predominantly because we're going to be doing multiple passes through the same bead. And obviously the 8O has a small hole, and you will need to pass through 5 or 6 times on each one. So definitely a size 12, and again, a £6 black Fireline. So the first thing we need to do, we're going to be starting our rope. This time we're not going to be making a loop, we're going to be using a stopper bead. So I'm going to take one of my 11 O's, I'm going to place it on my needle, and again you will need to add thread to this design, which we're going to be covering in the final chapter. So take a piece of thread, a manageable length. I tend to use fingertip to fingertip, which is about 6 foot. And that tends to do maybe a few inches of this design, and then, as I said in the last chapter, we'll show you how to add. So we've added our little 11 O. We're going to slide it down and leave a tail of between 8 and 10 inches, because you'll need to add a clasp at the end of your design. And then we're going to take the needle round the back and up through the bead that we're exiting, like so. And you should be able to slide the bead off at the end. So it's just a really nice, safe way of keeping your beads from falling off. So the first thing to know about the simple spiral technique, it has 2 core sections. It has your arc, which is the combination of beads that are actually going to make your spiral design. And then running through the center, we're going to have what's called the core. And for the core, you will need, for this design, a minimum of an 8O. If you're new to seed beading, and this is all new to you, try a 6O instead. So instead of having an 8O, an 11O and a 15, go for a 6, an 8 and an 11. But if you're used to seed beading and you know the difference between your needle sizes, i.e. between a 10 and a 12, and you're going to be incorporating 15s, 8/0 is the way to go for the core. So for this particular design, I've worked out all the numbers that you're going to need and all the combinations. If you want your spiral to form in a different way, obviously you need to experiment with the number of beads you use in the core and also for the arcs to make the spiral. But for your first beginning trial at the simple spiral, if you follow the combinations that I'm going to show you, you'll have the perfect piece of jewellery at the end. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add 6 of our 8/0 seed beads. And we're going to slide that down so it meets our stopper bead. Now from now on, you will be adding every round 1 core bead. This is the only time throughout the entire design that you add multiples of your core bead. So now we're going to find the combination for our arc. And what I definitely recommend doing is before you start is lay out on your bead mat your combination that you're going to use. So 15, 11, 8, one of our bicones in the center, an 8, an 11, and a 15/0. Okay, it's well worth leaving that on your mat somewhere and use that as a reference, because every single move that we do from now on is going to be following this simple combination. So we've got our core bead, so I'm going to hold that in my hand and I'm going to pick up a 15, an 11, an 8, a bicone, an 8, and an 11, and a 15. So that's the combination of beads that I'm going to use every time. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our needle, and as you can see, we're exiting through the top of our group of 6. I'm going to take my needle, just as we did with the stopper bead, I'm going to take the needle round to the back, right to the bottom, and I'm going to bring the needle up through all 6 core beads. So when I pull the needle, you can now see we have our core and we have our arc. What we're going to do then is we're going to flip our work so that the arc is on the left-hand side of our core. So from now on, right to the very end of your piece of jewellery, however long it is, we're going to be doing the following thing. We're going to be picking up a core bead, and we're going to be sliding that off of our needle. Then we're going to be picking up our combination. So that's 15, 1 11, 1 8, 1 bicone, 1 8, 1 11, and 1 15/0. Now do you remember when we did our first arc, I instructed you to take your needle up through all 6 of our core beads. So I'm going to slide our combination that we've just added all the way down so it meets our core. So I'm going to slide that down. And then what I want you to do is from that core bead, which is under the arc, we're going to count down 6. So we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's number 7. We don't need to do that. It's only the top 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to take our needle and we're going to sew up through the 6 core beads, just the core beads. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pull the needle, and that's our second arc around our core. So you can now see we've got an arc on either side. And then what we're going to do, depending on whether you're left-handed or right-handed, you need to move that second arc so it sits alongside the first. So I'm right-handed, so I use my left hand to pull that arc round so it meets its partner, and I'm going to pull nice and tight. So you can now see that the 2 arcs are sat together at a slight angle. We're going to hold that in our left hand. We're going to repeat. So I'm going to pick up your core bead. So remember that every single time. So 1 core bead, then our combination. So 15, 11, 8, a bicone. And that bicone in the middle, this is going to be your central point of your spiral. As we mentioned in the introduction, you can use a gemstone, you can use a round, you can use a fire polished, or in this case a bicone. It can't really be any bigger than a 4mm. It just becomes too heavy and too cumbersome, and it won't allow your spiral to sit nice and flat. So as I said, just up to a 3 or a 4mm, and that'll be absolutely perfect. So we've added our bicone, picking up an 8, so we're going to reverse the sizes down to a 15/0. We're going to slide all the way down so it meets our work, and once again we're going to find the last of our 8 O's, and we're going to count 6 from the top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're going to insert our needle and we're going to take it up through the 6. So there we go, that's the 6th one. And we're going to sew up through the 6. We're going to pull that nice and tight. And then we're going to take that last arc we added around the back so it meets the other 2. So again, make sure that's nice and tight. And can you see we're already starting to get that beautiful spiral. So as I mentioned in the introduction, it looks incredibly complicated, but the beading is actually doing all the work for you. It's making the spiral all by itself. It's very, very clever. And you can understand now why this is one of my favorite techniques. So next row, picking up our core bead, slide it off the needle. Then we're going to pick up our combination. So 15, 11, 8, bicone, 8, 11, 15. I'm going to slide that down so it meets our beading, and then we're going to count from the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pop in our needle and sew up through the last 6. And this is why I mentioned at the beginning to use, if you can, a size 12 needle, so you can actually see that I'm doing repetitive moves up through the core. So the smaller needle and the smaller thread, the better. I'm going to pull that nice and tight. So that's our 4th arc. We're going to slide that round, pull nice and tight. And if I lay that down, you can see the spiral forming straight away. And that is your simple spiral. That is the format. You add 1 core bead every time. You add the same combination, so leave that combination along the top of your bead mat and just repeat and repeat and repeat, always remembering to make sure that you fold your arc round so it meets its partners. And it's just absolutely beautiful. And as you can see, you can tell it's one of my favorite techniques. I've probably made nearly 200 simple spirals over the time. And if you want to do a larger spiral, you add more core beads to the beginning, so maybe 8, and then you make your combination of your arc larger. If you want something smaller and daintier, drop down to 4 arc beads and a smaller combination of your arc. It's all about trial and error. And after 3 or 4 moves, your beading will tell you whether it's going to work or not, whether the combination is just right, whether there's too many, whether you need to take off a few. It's just absolutely, it's so intuitive, this design. It will tell you what to do from the very start to the very finish. So that's the simple spiral. That's that tutorial done. The next one, we're going to use an old-fashioned technique called Peyote, which is used throughout the world by many seed beaders. And just following a simple move, we're going to turn it into the most beautiful spiral design. So many of you seed beaders out there, you're probably accustomed to the wonderful world of peyote, whether it's flat, whether it's tubular, whether it's odd count or even count. And I'm a massive fan of the even count tubular peyote. And I always want to give it an extra little twist. So I've come up with this beautiful spiral design. Now it's your conventional peyote tubular version, but with a simple combination of colours and taking the needle from the right colour, picking up a bead of a different colour, you get this incredible spiral design. It's a very simple technique, very, very, very therapeutic, and as you can see, it transforms your basic standard peyote. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, a couple of the designs that we're going to be covering today, I use a dowel, whether that's a wooden splint or whether that's a pen, just a simple pen if you're doing a bigger version. But as I mentioned, I love to use paracord, so I'm going to be using, again, paracord. Now this is called paracord 451, and the number denotes to the pound it will carry. So 451, it will take the weight 451 pound. So it's very, very substantial. And again, with the first tutorial that we covered, the chenille, you can actually remove the paracord at the end if you'd rather not have that, or use it as a design. And in the penultimate chapter, we'll just cover how you finish some of the designs, incorporating the paracord or clasps and that sort of thing. So in front of me, again, I'm going down the 8/0 route. It's one of my favourite sizes, and I've got 3 colours. These are quite a dramatic range. We've gone for a silver lined red, a real nice pillar box red, a silver, and one of my all-time favourite colours, the gunmetal grey. So perfect. So I'm going to continue to use the paracord as the design. So I've colour matched, so I've gone for this red, which is just a perfect accent design. So what I'm going to pick up on my needle is the following combination. And again, if you're going to be making a rope, I think 8 is a really nice number to use. So I wanted to make a feature of the gunmetal with the silver and the red as the accent. So that's going to be my dominant colour. So on my needle, again, this is a size 12. With peyote, you can use a size 10 if you want a slightly larger needle. And again, I've gone for the black 6-pound Fireline. So I'm going to pick up, first of all, the following combination. And again, being a rope, you will need to add more thread. So that's going to be covered later on in the tutorials. So I'm going to pick up 2 gunmetal, 2 silver, 2 gunmetal, and 2 red. And again, I'm going to slide those down, and we're going to tie a loop, hence why I've not popped on a stopper bead. So I'm going to tie a single knot. And again, before I close that, I'm just going to pop in my paracord. And I'm going to pull that nice and tight. So you can see that 8 beads fit absolutely perfectly around the paracord. And then I'm going to tie another single knot. That's all we need to start. You can see it slides nice and easily down your rope. So here we go. So with peyote, we need to do the technique of jumping and then skipping, jumping and skipping. So as you can see, I am exiting through my gunmetal. I always like to sew away from a couple just to get away from the knot. And then what we're going to do is the following. Whichever bead you are exiting, that's the colour of the bead that we're going to pick up. So I'm exiting a red. So I'm going to pick up a red. I'm going to jump a gap, jump an 8/0 into the next gunmetal, pulling that nice and tight. I'm going to turn my work. I'm exiting a gunmetal. Going to pick up a gunmetal, jump a bead into the next, which is going to be the first silver. Holding that nice and tight, make sure it sits above. You will need to just strengthen the beads when you start. As soon as you've done a few rounds, it will all look after itself. I'm exiting a silver, I'm picking up a silver, jump 1 through 1. That nice and tight, making sure it sits nice and neatly in situ, which this one does. And then final one is we're exiting a gunmetal. We're going to pick up a gunmetal, we're going to jump the first red and sew into the second. And then we're going to make sure that's nice in position, pulling it nice and tight. So already you can see we've got rows of 3 starting that spiral pattern. So once we've done our 4 rounds, we need to do what's called a step up. So all we're going to do is the bead that we're exiting, we're just going to, without adding any beads, we're just going to step up diagonally to get to the exterior section. Pull that needle. And now we're ready to start our next round. The gaps are already here from now on, so the gaps are telling us where to position our needle and our next bead. We already know that whichever colour bead we're exiting, that's the colour that we're going to pick up. So we're exiting a red, picking up a red, jumping the gap. We're exiting the gunmetal, we pick up a gunmetal. So as you can see, once you've done the first couple of rounds, the beading tells you what to do. It couldn't be easier. It really is one of the most effective and simple techniques. And just from having that little dowel going through the centre just to hold everything in position. It makes it a lot easier. Going to pick up a gunmetal, so we're exiting the gunmetal. We're going to jump the gap into the red. Once we've done our 4 beads, we step up, so we just turn diagonally and we step up through the red. So whenever we're doing a step up, we always sew through 2 beads, not 1. Now we're ready to start again. So we're exiting a red. Going to pick up a red, jump the gap into the gunmetal, putting that nice and tight. Gunmetal, I'm going to pick up a gunmetal, I'm going to jump the gap into the silver. Pull nice and tight. We're exiting a silver, we're going to pick up a silver, jump the gap into the next gunmetal. It's quite easy to see against this paracord. You can see that distinct gap and you can see the space that the needle will be taking over before it drops its bead in position. And then we're going to pick up the last in that round. So it's the gunmetal, jump the gap into the red, turn 45 degrees to do your step ups. You can see there's a slight diagonal, and then we're going to pull up and pull nice and tight. Exiting a red, ready for the first round. Jump the gap into the gunmetal. If you want to, you can do 8 different colours if you like, and you'll get more of a rainbow pattern. That's quite nice fun. You can be completely sporadic and just take some tubes of seed beads, throw them all into a bag, empty them out, and then choose one at a time, be completely random. That's a really nice little technique to do as well. There's all sorts of permutations with peyote. So this is the important step up. So we're going to jump the gap, turn the needle 45 degrees, sew through 2. And then pull nice and tight. Let's do a couple more. So red, jump the gap into the gunmetal. Exiting the gunmetal, so we know we're going to pick one up. Pull that through. Then we're going to pick up a silver, jumping the gap. And we're coming up to that step up. This is our 4th colour. So we're going to pick up the gunmetal as we're exiting. We're going to jump the gap into the red, just tilt 45 degrees to the diagonal. That's your step up, and now your needle is perfectly aligned. Slide that back. It's perfectly aligned, ready for your next round. So if I pull that nice and tight, and you can already see how quickly that spiral takes effect. So a simple little move like adding the bead that you're exiting from will give you this beautiful spiral right from the start right through to the finish. And as you can see, they make the most amazing spiral designs. I'm just imagining Christmas and doing candy canes and Halloween pieces and Valentine's makes. And again, you can, if you want to, drop the size down to your 11/0 if you want something a bit daintier. But I think 8/0 is the perfect size for doing your peyote spiral. So that's 3 designs completed. And our last one is beautiful. And again, one tiny little move will transform the designs. And I'm going to introduce you to the wonderful world of the Russian spiral. Before I show you how to finish off some of your rope designs, we have one more tutorial to share with you, and that's all about the Russian spiral. It's absolutely beautiful, and as you can see, some of the designs you can make are absolutely stunning, and it contains 2 sizes of seed bead, so nothing too out of the ordinary. And it's again a very therapeutic, very methodical, very intuitive piece of jewellery. And as in lots of ropes, once you've done a small section, the rope seems to take over and guide you into your next move or the next colour choice. So again, I think ropes without a doubt are some of my favourite techniques. So for the rope that I'm going to show you, I'm using an 8/0 bead, but this is a different type. This is called a hex bead. And this is a very small tube, an 8/0 size. But if you look down from top to bottom. It's actually hexagonal, it's six-sided, and it works so beautifully for this technique. So I've gone for 3 different colours of the hex bead. I've gone for white, I've gone for this beautiful seafoam AB coated, and I've gone for this really bright, vivid, Christmassy, silver lined hex bead. And I just think that really nice ombre tone. So as well as your accent bead, you're going to need your main netting bead, if you like. Let's call it your netting bead. And I've gone for an 11-0, and I've gone for a bright gold. So again, keeping that festive look. Once again, I'm going to repeat myself and just inform you that you will need to add thread, but we're going to cover that at the end of the tutorial sections. So I've got a black 6-pound Fireline, and again, another size 12 needle. You can use a size 10 needle for this. It's not imperative that you use a size 12. I think of all the tutorials we've covered today, I think the simple spiral is a must for a size 12, but the other 3 projects, you can use the size 10 needle. So let's make a start. So first of all, we're going to pick up the following. We're going to pick up 2 of our 11-0 gold, 1 of our white, 2 of our 11, 1 of our seafoam, 2 of our gold, and 1 of our bottle green hex bead. So we've got 3 sets of 2 11s and 3 of our hex beads. Again, we're not going to use a stopper bead, we're going to make a loop. So we're going to slide it down, and we're going to tie a single knot followed by another single knot. That's all we need to do to make a good start, is a single knot followed by a single knot. So you can now see, if I lay it out, we have in effect a circular triangle shape with 3 colours interspersed with the 11-0s. So you all know me by now. First thing I'm going to do is sew away from the knot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew through the bottle green hex and exit through the first of the 11-0s, like so. Perfect, we're in the right position. And now from now on, what we're going to do, very similar to the peyote, it's whichever colour bead we're exiting is the colour of the seed bead that we're going to pick up. So I've exited the green, I am exiting the gold, but we've exited the green, so the green is what I'm going to pick up. So from now on, we're going to pick up the following combinations. We're exiting our green, so I'm going to pick up a green, followed by 2 11-0s. And what we're going to do is we're going to jump. It sounds a bit counterintuitive, but what we're going to do is we're going to jump the next 11, the next hex bead, and we're going to enter the 11-0 that directly follows it. So we're going to jump quite a few beads with the new beads we're going to add. I'm going to pull that through. Now keep it flat at this point. When we complete the round, I will show you how we form a cup, and then that's how the beginning of the rope will form. So we've exited the seafoam, so we know we're going to pick up a seafoam followed by 2 11-0s. We're going to sew all the way around the next 11 and the hex bead and sew into the 11-0. Again, keeping it nice and flat to start with. Pop my tail out of the way. Now we've just exited the white, so we're going to pick up a white followed by 2 11-0s. So that combination is all the same every single move. It's always going to be an 8-0 hex bead plus 2 11s. And now what we're going to do, and this involves something called a step up, which features in many of the rope designs. What we're going to do is we're going to sew round, exiting it through the 11-0, directly following it, go up through the next green bead. If I do that in one move. So we're going to go round, get my tail out of the way. There we go. So I'm going to pull that through. I've sewn through the green, and then I'm going to sew up through the 11-0. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull ever so slightly bringing up the sides of the rope, like so. And you can already see we've got that cup starting. So let's do the next round. So I've exited the green. I'm going to pick up a green and 2 of my 11Os. And once it forms a cup, it makes it so much easier to file where you're going. So what we're going to do is always the 11O that follows the next hex colour. So we're going to jump. I mean, it's even in bigger space now. So we're going to jump. We're going to miss the hex and sew into the next 11O. So we're going to pull that nice and tight. We're going to turn our work. We've just exited the seafoam, so we're going to pick up a seafoam, 2 11s, and then we're going to jump the white into the next 11. Pull that nice and tight, again forming that cup. And then we've just exited the white, so we're going to pick up a white and 2 11Os. And you can see, this makes it so much easier. We're going to jump the gap into the 11, of which there is only 1 now, so we can't sew into any other. We're going to jump the gap into that 11, following the green, and this is where we're going to step up through the next hex and the 11. So now when I pull nice and tight, and you can already see we've got that spiral starting to form. You can see the 3 whites, and you can see the 3 greens, with the gold interspersing. So the reason it's called, the way it's got its name, is that the gold beads are spiraling in one direction and the other beads, your accent beads, are spiraling in the other direction, which looks really odd to begin with, but once you've done your first couple of rounds, it will all make sense. So let's do our next round. So we've exited the bottle green, so we're going to pick up a bottle green and 2 of our 11Os, so 1 and 2. We're going to jump the seafoam and we're going to sew into the 11O that follows it straight afterwards. So we're going to pull that through. Then we're going to pick up a seafoam, that's the bead we've just sewn through. So we're going to pick up a seafoam, 2 11Os, jump over the white into the next 11 that follows it, pulling nice and tight. And you can already see now it's a lot easier to handle. So we've exited the white, so we're going to pick up a white and 2 11Os. We're going to jump, now this again, this makes perfect sense now. Look, we're going to jump the gap, jump the green into the 11, take your needle through the next. So the green is in the right position now to sew straight through. It's in that perfect position. Pull that nice and tight. And you can see then we've got the greens following the spiral in one direction and your gold beads in another. So let's do a couple more rows. So we're exiting the bottle green. So we're going to pick up a green, 2 11Os. We're going to jump the gap. Again, you can use as many beads as you like to do your rope, but just bear in mind the larger the amount of beads you use, the larger the hole will be going down through the center. So I think 3 is just enough and it keeps its tubular shape. I think if you added more than say 4 or 5, it would start, you'll be able to flatten it, and then you would need to have something going down the center to keep it nice and secure. So we're exiting the seafoam. So it's seafoam, 2 11s. We're going to jump the gap over the white into the next 11O. Pull it nice and tight. And then we're exiting the white, so we're going to pick up a white and then pick up 2 11Os. We're going to jump over, it's those greens again, so we're going to jump the gap into the 11 and sew through the next hex and the next 11 to do your step up. Pull that nice and tight, and I'll do one more round. So we're exiting the green, we're going to pick up a green and 2 11Os. So it's always the base colour followed by the 2 11Os. So green, 2 11s. we're going to jump over the seafoam into the next 11/0 that follows it directly afterwards, pulling that nice and tight. We're exiting the seafoam, so we know we're going to pick up the same colour. So seafoam and 2 11/0s. So we're going to jump over the white, pull that through, and then we're going to pop on our last. So it's the white we're exiting. So we're going to pick up the white, we're going to jump over the green. The beads are there waiting. You can see if I place the needle alongside, the beads are telling you where to go next. So we're going to go up through, and we're going to sew and exit the 11/0. So if I now pull nice and tight, you can now see we've got the gold spiral going in one direction, and then we've got our beaded spiral going in the other to make your Russian spiral. And again, as we've mentioned in previous techniques, you can make little stations, little sections. So you would just tie off and then put that to one side, make 9 or 10, and then come up with a design, maybe with a large gemstone in between, or you could knot it to make a knotted necklace. It's a really versatile, beautiful little technique. So what I'm going to show you in the next section are just a few of your finishing touches, how to finish off your pieces, whether you're tying them off and using a clasp, or whether you're going to use the paracord technique. So I think without further ado, we'll show you some finishing off techniques, and then as a little ending, I'm going to give you a couple of top tips, a really simple way of threading a needle, and how to, as I've mentioned throughout the tutorials previously, I'm going to show you how to add thread to your designs. So come along and join me, and I'll show you how to do that. So you've made your incredible pieces of jewellery. So what I thought I'd do is just give you a quick overview of some of the ways of finishing your designs. So in front of me, I have got all 4 of our project categories. We've got our chenille, we've got our Russian spiral, we've got our simple spiral, and we've got our peyote. So let's go in order. Let's start off with our chenille. So what I've got here is I've got my piece of paracord running through the center, as we mentioned before. And then right at the very end, all you would do is you would take your needle without adding any beads and just sew round and round and round and round the last row until you can't get the needle through any further. And then you simply just cut the thread away. And then right at the beginning, where you've left your tail, you would replace your needle onto this side of your thread, and again repeat. So round and round and round and round. And then what I've done here is I've got a beautiful magnetic tumbler clasp here, and I've inserted the end into each side and just adhered using a piece of your hypo cement glue if you want to leave it overnight, or some of the glue that's super, which is one of my favorite go-to glues, and then let that set, and you've got a beautifully perfect finished off piece of work. So that's one way of finishing. Now our Russian spiral here, what I've done here is I've used the paracord as we mentioned in the previous tutorial, and then right at the end what I've done is I've taken it out, and that is completely hollow, so you can see it's got such movement about it. It's beautiful. And then what I've done again is we have our last row, and again if I just pop that to one side, is I've got my 3 gemstones and I've got my black 11/0s, and all I've done again is sewn round and round and round and round. And just before I cut the thread is I take a 4th gemstone. I've taken the needle up through the 11/0, and then you see I've attached a magnetic clasp. So if I just open that, and then what I've done is I've sewn about 3 or 4 times, attaching the clasp to that 11/0, and then I've sewn back down through the gemstone in the 11/0, and then I've continued sewing round and round until I can't get the needle through anymore. I've repeated that on the other end using the tail, and that's a beautifully nice way of finishing off your pieces. So that's your Russian spiral. Then with the peyote, again, we mentioned earlier, we've got several ways of finishing. I'm going to show you the 2 paracord ways first of all. So we've got our paracord running all the way through. I've cut an inch from either end, and these are Kumihimo bell cap endings, which we've seen many times throughout on the website, on JewelleryMaker website. So all I've done is I've cut the paracord. Using a naked flame, I've melted the ends to stop any further fraying. And again, as in the previous section, I've actually just glued the paracord inside the bell cap, again using JewelleryMaker glue, the glue that's super, or your hypo cement. Let it set, and then I've popped on a lobster claw clasp just to finish that off. And then this is the necklace version. This is the black, the gunmetal, the silver and the red that we showed you in the demonstration. And all I've done is I've made my rope. I decided that I didn't want the rope to be at the back of the neckline. So all this is just an extension of the paracord. So you can just slide that through to get the length that you require. And at the end here, I've made my own bell caps using 1mm wire, for which there will be a tutorial coming up on the website shortly. And again, I've popped in a bolt-ring clasp this time, just to finish this one off. And then we can move on now to, this is a peyote. It does look like a Russian spiral, isn't it? But this is actually peyote. And I've used the main color, so 2 black, and then on the other sides, I've alternated white, purple, and you get this amazing checkerboard pattern. And what I've done here is I have my tube, I've taken out my paracord, and what I've done is I've taken the thread and I've sewn round and round and round and round until I can't get the needle through, repeated the same the other end, and then what I've done, as you can see, is I've taken a piece of wire. Now in this one I'm using memory wire, but you can use a gauge, maybe a 0.6 or a 0.8mm. I've attached it to half of my clasp, and then I've popped on, in this case, an 8/0 followed by a black onyx 6mm round, and I've fed the wire all the way through the tubing, which is why I love ropes, because you get that interior hole going down through the center. You have plenty of scope to add materials to make a nice form for your bracelet or your necklace. And then I've repeated the same at the other end. So I've popped on a matching onyx and then your seed bead and then made a loop. So as I said, this is memory wire, hence it's keeping its shape. And what's lovely about, as I said, having that interior hole going through the center, you can put any gauge wire, predominantly a 6 or an 8 or a 0.1mm gauge, and then that will mold to your wrist size as well. So that's a really nice way of using memory wire or wire. Then with this one here, this is a Russian spiral. And what I've done, if you look at the top here, is I've sewn round and round and round until I can't get the needle through. And then what I've done, before I've cut off, I've made this lovely little seed bead loop. So I've exited one of the 11/0s from my spiral. I've popped 6, 8, 10 of my 11/0s, and then I've made, can you see, I've got a free flowing loop at one end. And again, I've sewn 2 or 3 times just to strengthen, continued sewing round and round, cut my thread off, repeated the same the other side. So you can see that I've got 2 seed bead loops, and then within that loop, you will then pop a jump ring and your clasp. And as a little extra dimension, I've added a little crystal AB coated butterfly to act as a charm. So again, that's another way. And then our final show and tell is the spiral, the simple spiral. So I'm going to show you 2 different ways of finishing. This is the earrings that I mentioned, exactly the same way. You can see how beautiful that exterior of the arc looks. This is using incredible blue selenite, and it really does show off the spiral to its best. So we've got our stopper bead at the bottom. I've made my spiral section, and we're going to work on the top first. So all I've done is I have my thread coming up through the core. I've popped on an 11/0 seed bead, and then what I've done is I've taken twice knotted, twice knotted, twice knotted around the base of the shepherd's hook, and then I've taken my needle back down through the core, maybe an inch. I've exited and I've cut off my thread. So that's nicely secure to your shepherd's hook. And then the other end, you'll have your tail coming out the bottom, as I instructed you to leave. Many of your projects always leave a tail for this reason. I've popped on a needle, and then what I've done is I've treated that last little bead there, that little stopper, I've kept it in situ, and all I've done is I've taken the needle and I've sewn up, back down, up, back down, up, back down, up, maybe 5 times. And again, your needle will find it quite difficult to get through that last hole, and then you'll be able to cut your thread. That's fully secure. It's a nice little punctuation mark of a stop, and it doesn't interfere with the flow of that beautiful spiral design. As you can see, it works absolutely perfectly. But I definitely recommend, before you cut your thread, even how many knots you've made, always sew away from the knot before you cut it. It just gives that extra safety precaution before you unfortunately cut your thread and you cut through the knot accidentally and your whole work falls apart and you'll have to start again. So it's always, again, a little top tip. And what I've done here is exactly the same as I've just shown you with the earrings, but this time what I've done is I've popped on 2 jump rings and a bolt ring clasp instead. So it's exactly the same. You have your needle and thread coming up through the core. I've added this time an 11/0 and a 15/0. I've taken it through the 2 beads. I've wrapped it twice around the base of the clasp, knotted it, wrap round twice, knotted it, and then I've taken the needle back down through the core, exit after at least 1 inch, then cut the thread, and then repeat exactly the same way the other end with the tail that we've left. So I've shown you, I think, 5 or 6 different ways of finishing. And what's really good is all of these finishing techniques you can use with any of the designs. It's absolutely fail-safe. It's absolutely brilliant. Now, one question that I get asked so many times is how do you add thread to your designs, especially with ropes, which are long designs. So as a little bonus track, come back and join me, and I'm going to show you not only how to add thread, but a fail-safe way of threading your needle first time. So before you can start any of your seed beading projects, first thing you have to do is thread your needle. And I don't know about you, but when I first started seed beading using a needle, threading a needle was the bane of my life. I found it really stressful, and number of times that I gave up when I couldn't thread my needle. And then I've learned this amazing technique, and fingers crossed, first time threading. So I'm just going to talk you through the thread first of all. So whether this is Fireline or your Wildfire, you have to imagine that currently your thread, when you take it off of the spool, it's a cylinder. It's a very, very, very fine, long cylinder. It's the way that the thread is produced. And the eye of your needle isn't oblong, it has straight sides. And there's an old adage, you can't get a square peg in a round hole, and it's a similar sort of vein to this. So what you need to do first of all is you need to condition your thread. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn the cylinder into an oblong shape. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is the way that I do this is I take about 1 inch, the last inch of the thread, and I draw it between my thumbnail and my index finger 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And you can now see, if I lay that down flat, the difference between the end, which is nice and flat, and then the cylinder. Okay, then what you need to do is don't offer the thread to the needle like so. You want to offer the needle to the thread, and the best way to do that is to slide your thread down in between your thumb and finger, just so you can see the tip of the thread here, and then you're going to offer the needle up to the thread nice and slowly, and the thread will go through the eye of the needle and pull through first time. So what I'd recommend doing is just spend, if you've got half an hour, get a cup of tea and just repeatedly practice and practice and practice this technique. But I think you'll find as soon as you condition your thread, you turn that cylinder into a rectangle, you'll find that it's so much easier to thread it through the eye of the needle. And as you've just seen, first time, I have been doing many hundreds and hundreds of needles I've threaded, but if you just get that technique into your staple technique bank, I think that will just prove invaluable to you. And the other thing I'm going to show you, as I've promised, is how to add thread to your project. So this is the chenille project that we were working on way back at the beginning of the tutorial section. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to cut the thread and pretend that we need to add more. Okay, so that's our extension of our working thread. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our reel of thread. We're going to take off, again, a manageable length, depending on how long you're comfortable with. Cut that. Okay. Now, we don't need to condition this end. We will need to condition the other end to pop on the needle. But to attach our new thread, we take the new end and we're just going to make an overhand loop around our index finger, like so. Hold it where the thread crosses. And then with the longer piece of thread, I'm just going to double it up and feed it up through the loop, catch it and pull. So in effect, we're making what's called a slip knot. So you can see I can make it larger or smaller pulling on the thread. Okay, so that's a slip knot. I'll show you that once more. I'm going to wrap it around our finger. Where the threads cross, you can see the cross. I'm going to hold that with my thumb and finger. I'm going to fold the thread in half and bring it up through and pull. So we have our slip knot. Okay, so again, practice that for about 10 minutes just to get to grips with it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that little loop I've made and I'm going to place it over the top of our old thread, the thread that we've run out of. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that slip knot nice and tight. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull nice and tight and I'm going to take the threads and I'm going to pull, hold on nice and tight, and I'm going to pull it down so they meet the thread at the bottom. So I'm going to pull that nice and tight. So now you have, that's the tail from the start of your work, ignore that. And then you have your old thread, you have the tail of your new thread, and then you have your long length of thread to continue with. So what you would do is you do a few rounds of your seed beading, and then you would take your two threads. You can leave it right to the very end if you want to, but I find it quite annoying to have all these loose threads while I'm trying to work. So I do 3 or 4 rows of the work I'm doing, and then I will tie a single knot, pulling that nice and tight, tie another single knot, pull it nice and tight, and then you're ready then to go in and cut off your excess threads. And then what we'll do then is we've got our new thread, we'll find the end, we'll prepare our thread as we did just a moment ago. So I'm just going to draw the thread through my thumb and finger. I'm going to slide the thread down so you can just see the point. I'm going to take the needle off the needle to the thread and place that straight through and pull the thread through again, first time. Okay, so once you've learnt these two incredible techniques, there'll be so less frustration and anxiety in your beading because you've encountered probably the most difficult part of your seed beading journey, and that's adding thread and threading your needle. So I think we've probably accomplished that quite well. So what have we accomplished? We've accomplished 4 tutorials. We now have 4 incredible rope designs under our belt. And all that's left is to thank you very much for joining me today in the wonderful JewelleryMaker Academy. Make sure you keep an eye on the website to check new tutorials up and coming. I know that I've got a few coming up very, very soon. Thank you very much for joining me, and just have fun with these amazing techniques. Learn to thread your needle, learn to add thread, get all of these amazing techniques, and I think you're just going to have a whale of a time. So thanks very much again. I've been Mark Smith. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.